And so today I want to kind of introduce you, if you haven't already been familiar with the Apostle John. Now, John is the youngest of the apostles in this time, this circle of the inner three, that we could often hear about, those closest to Jesus. And he is one of those people who we learned that Christ would later on say, the one whom Jesus loved. I mean, he's gotten very close to him. But in this passage today that I want to kind of tell the story about, this is where we find that they're leading up to the Passover, the last time Jesus will be with his disciples. And Jesus tells John and Peter to go out and make some preparations. And so I want to tell it from John's perspective today, if I could, as I did last week. I want to kind of share the story of this servant that we encounter. I guess it could happen this way. Jesus sent me and Peter to go out on a Thursday to find and prepare a place for us to meet for the Passover, which was quickly approaching. Now, we were to go out and find this man who had been carrying a water jar on his head. When you see him, you're supposed to go to him, Jesus said, and tell him the teacher has need of the room. He has a room above his house, and tell him we'd like to use it for the Passover. Peter and I thought this would be odd that a man would be carrying a water jar, so it must be easy for us to find him because often the women were the one who did that. Sure enough, as we did, we went into Jerusalem, and there is this guy walking with a water jar on his head. So we followed him to his house, and when he gets there, we walk up to him and say, "Sir, the teacher has need of a room. He says you have a room that we could use to hold the Passover." When we get there, he says, "Sure, let me show you the way." And he goes up, and we begin to make preparations. He had almost had everything in order. He already had the table spread where we could go in and sit. All we had to do was get the lamb and the bitter herbs and the wine and the bread, and we were prepared. Or so we thought. You see, as we made our way in, we found out after we go and all the other disciples began to show up that we had left one thing unattended. There by the door, because he was a gracious host, the gentleman had left a towel and a basin and a pitcher of water. We were supposed to always have someone, a servant, at the door to wash the feet of those who would come and enter the house. Back in those days, we all wore sandals. And as I've looked around today, this time of year, it looks like the style is coming back in. Well, you can imagine as you go from place to place, and our streets were not as manicured and as nice as yours are. Often there was a sewage ditch running through the middle of that, and you had to walk these streets, and so you can imagine the dirtiness that would get on our feet. And so it would be only customary that someone would come in and be willing to wash the feet of those as they entered the home. Well, you can imagine typically it's the person who was the lowest ranking amongst those who would be there. Me being one of the youngest, you would assume it would be me, but as I've already shared, I'm one of the inner three: Peter, James, John. Though I may be young, it seems like I would have more in elevation than those who would be around the table. So we begin to look at one another. We begin to examine each other, and we begin to look for who's willing to go and do that. As we begin to notice, no one seemed to be willing to lower themselves to come to that station of life. And so we begin to recline around the table. Now you have to remember, as you recline around the table, we didn't sit in tables and chairs such as you do today. We reclined around a table that was only a foot or so off the floor, and we would lean back on our left elbow and then lean to one side, and so our feet would be next to the next person beside us. And so it would be very, very nice if someone had taken time to wash the feet of the man next to me. But no one chose to do that. You see, we had come together during this time to celebrate this Passover, this remembrance of the time when God had sent a plague to kill all of the firstborn that were in Egypt, and he spared the families of the Israelites who had smeared blood across the doorposts of their house. The blood of the lamb that was there would be what would recognize that the death angel would pass over. And so we honored that God has spared us. That's the way it is still today. The blood of the lamb, the sacrificial lamb, still spares and grants life to those who are willing to place it over the doorposts of their hearts. Well, as we looked around, we recognized that we were still not quite what Jesus had always been instructing and intended us for us to be. After all, should we not at this time be willing to humble ourselves and to serve? But yet we felt like that was not it. There was a debate as we began to say, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? Before Jesus gets there, who's going to go and wash their feet? Who should be the one who does this? And then it's almost as if Jesus knew everything that we'd been thinking and saying as he walked into the room. And so as he walks in, he notices that no one had taken time to take this responsibility upon themselves, and he rose to his feet. Jesus says, the king of the Gentiles lorded over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not like those. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, I have to say, we've kind of heard this before. Jesus is reminding us that the greatest needs to be the least, and the least needs to be the greatest, and you've got to be a servant, and you can know this. The story has gone on and on and on. And then he even says things like, humble yourself and follow my example. Don't get me wrong, those are all true statements, but from the way we looked at things, we were already doing that. We've given up so much to follow Jesus as it was. To think about being the person who needs to stop and wash somebody's feet is just not what we would consider what we should have been doing. Nobody had really thought about it. And so we like the fact that Jesus said we would be rewarded and we would be able to drink in his kingdom and eat in his kingdom. We like the idea of being judges over the 12 tribes of Israel. That all sounds great. That's what we signed on for, after all. But right now, Jesus is calling us to sacrifice and service. Be willing to serve other people. And as he looked at us, it was like Jesus could read our minds. Isn't it funny how we think that we know so much sometimes, and yet we miss the elephant in the room? We all had dirty feet. Nobody's willing to stoop and wash them. Nobody's willing to be a servant. Jesus did something that was so embarrassing to me and everyone else in the room. He gets up. He takes his outer robe off. He folds it over one time, lays it across his pillow where he had been reclining against, and he walks over to the door. He grabs a towel, wraps it around his waist. He pours some water out of the pitcher into the basin, and then he comes and he kneels down right beside of me. And what could I say? What could I do? I mean, here it is. I'm sitting here beside of Jesus, and he grabs my foot and places it in the water, and all I could do was just have my eyes great big and wondering what it's supposed to be doing, and I couldn't even look up at him and look him in the face because I knew I should have been the one who had been willing to stoop and wash his feet, and now here he is willing to stoop and wash my feet. He places my foot in the basin. He raises it out and he takes the towel and he dries it off. He goes in succession to my next one. And then he comes as he works his way around the table to one apostle, to the next, and then he comes to Peter. Now, Peter was the type of fellow who had always done things and tried things when others wouldn't be willing. As a matter of fact, Peter would be the type of person who boasted, you know what, I was the guy, I shouldn't be washing feet after all. Don't forget, I did walk on water. And I wanted to come this close and say, yeah, but you also would have drowned if Jesus hadn't have saved you. But I said nothing. Well, when he came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you don't understand what I'm doing now, but someday you will. Jesus is using this experience with washing the feet of each one of us apostles as a picture of what he was about to do for us on the cross. We didn't understand that, how he was going to serve us and wash us by dying for us. Peter didn't get it. And must I say I didn't get it either? No, Peter protested, you will never wash my feet. Jesus told him, unless I wash you, you will not belong to me. Say what you want about Peter. He loved Jesus. You know what he said? Then wash my hands and my head as well, Lord, not just my feet. Jesus replied, a person who is bathed all over does not need to wash except for the feet to be entirely clean. And you disciples are clean, but not all of you, for Jesus knew who was going to betray him. That is what he meant when he said, not all of you are clean. He knew Judas was planning on going out, and he had already made a plan to betray him to the leaders of the Jewish people. But he served him just like he would anyone else. He stooped down, even though he knew this was the man that very night that was going to go and betray him and sell him for a few pieces of silver. He still chose to say, though you're going to do this, you're this valuable to me, I'll even serve you. After Jesus finished washing Peter's feet, he put the basin and the dirty towel and all that stuff away back by the door, just as it had been, put his outer robe on, and he sat down and began to eat dinner with us, just like nothing had ever happened. You know what he said? He says, do you understand what I've done for you? I have to say, we didn't at first. So Jesus explained it. He says, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightfully so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Blessed? Wow. Your preacher earlier said it was such a great blessing to give and then to receive, but I have to be honest with you, I do love receiving, don't you? And yet no greater blessing have I found in my life than when, after I understood the lesson Jesus taught me here, that it was greater to give up everything I'd ever had and end up spending a life in exile later on in the latter part of my life and have Jesus than have everything else that was in the world at my disposal. Do you understand? Do you understand the lesson that Jesus was trying to teach you? You know as well as we did that you're supposed to be a servant. You're supposed to be serving. God calls each and every one of us to serve. He said, I did not come to be served, but to be a servant. Likewise, you should do the same. Jesus didn't just take our word that we knew how to serve. He took the time to show an example of just how low he is willing to go to redeem us and to help us and to clean us. And then remind us there is nothing that we should not be willing to do to lift other people up above ourselves. And I wonder what he sees when he looks at your life. I think too many times we want to be served instead of being the one who serves. He looks at how we live. He sees children who sit in front of computer screens and they do their Facebooks and all these other kind of social media things that they want to do, and they're texting their BFFs on their iPhones and munching on favorite snacks and calling mom or dad and saying, you need to come and bring me a drink, or you need to do so-and-so for me. And he says, do you understand what I did for you? He sees husbands who wish their wives would do more for them, and wives who wish their husbands would do more for them. And Jesus says, don't you understand what I did for you? Jesus looks at the members of the congregations that he has dotted all around the world, and he sees people who wonder why the church doesn't do more for them and make them more comfortable and help them have a better time. And he says, don't you understand what I've done for you? What did he do? That's the question we have to ask, isn't it? He served. He's helping them understand in this very moment, though the night is going to be the night where you and I will end up being separated, from now on, I'm still willing to give up everything. Instead of you serving me in this time where I feel like I'm going to be in my most dire time of need, I'm willing to show you one more time how much I love you. And he asks you and I to do the same. And so he made the sacrifice of indignity by washing the feet of those who would run out on him later that night. I have to be honest, I did. And yet he served me. He sacrificed himself. He served us later by dying on a cross. And he's asking the same question today. Do you understand what I've done for you? I've left you an example that you should walk in my steps. You should do as I do. Be a servant. Let me ask you, are you willing to make some sacrifices in your life? I mean, we can all judge it. You've often heard this saying that we can always tell what people are most important in their people's lives because of the things that they dedicate their time and their money and their efforts to, can't we? And we invest in the kingdom? Or are our gifts sometimes just those little paltry type little sacrificial things to remind it, well, I need to give Jesus a little something. But when we really invest in the kingdom, we're saying, I'm willing to be a servant. So what are you committed to? I mean, for some of us, maybe it's sports and athletics, and there's nothing wrong with those things as long as they don't consume us and pull us away from our relationship with Christ. Watching games and keeping up with scores and stats. Some people are phenomenal with those type of things. Not necessarily wrong, but when they consume you, when you spend more time and emphasis on that than studying and knowing God and talking to Him, then maybe there's a problem. For others, it may be a pursuit of money and riches. Are you committed to the pursuit of pleasure? You see, everybody commits themselves to something, and what we have to say is we're willing to sacrifice those types of commitments to serve Christ and serve the people in whom He loves. What it comes down to is, he says, I'm willing to make this sacrifice and commit myself to you forever. Are you willing to understand that and commit to me and serve me forever? Later in my writings in Revelation, I remind you that we will serve around His throne and worship Him forever and ever and ever. You remember the wording? We will serve around His throne. We will not be there for Him to serve us. We will worship Him through that. So today you need to ask yourself, as we come together in this upper room, each of us know that there are feet to be washed. How, you must say? Unless you're hopelessly clueless into the understanding of it, you would understand that there are children who need someone to teach them about Jesus. There are meals and preparations to be made at times when bereavement take place or family get-togethers take place for the church, or things need to be picked up and cleaned up, or walls need to be painted. There could be any number of things that take place. Songs need to be sung, instruments played, audio, video equipment need to be run, and the list could go on and on and on. And you and I need to say, this is my way of washing feet, just as Jesus was willing to wash mine. Jesus said He didn't come to be served, but to be a servant and to give His life as a ransom for many. Ransom, meaning what? You can't pay it, but somebody's willing to pay it. You're that valuable. Let me ask you, someone around you is valuable. Would your time and your efforts be a ransom for that person nearby you? Is that willing to stoop yourself to wash the feet, so to speak? Now, if you've already accepted Jesus and you've been baptized into Christ and you've been washed by Jesus, the blood of the Lamb has washed away your sins. You need to understand that you need to be stooping and washing now. Jesus told us that the person who is washed, their entire body, need only to wash their feet. That's a symbol for us coming before Christ and as a Christian and repenting of the things that have gone on in our life that we know are not pleasing to Him, and simply asking for forgiveness. To wash your feet because you've strayed. I've been down some paths, God, that are not pleasing. And if you've accepted Jesus as your Savior, but you're not serving Him, then you need to be washed free of that. And if you're here this morning, you've never been baptized into Christ, you've never surrendered. Jesus has given everything. He says, I have washed you. I've been willing to serve you. I have done everything I can to demonstrate my love for you. Today is the day that you can come and say, Jesus, completely wash me. Redeem me. I now understand what you did for me. We're going to sing a closing song. And as we sing this closing song, I pray that if God has laid something on your heart that you need to surrender to Him, or if you want to surrender your life to Him and be baptized for the remission of your sin, that you can say, God, because of what you've done, now cleanse me, wash me. Let me know today that the servant that I have received a blessing from, I can now serve.